matches all the cash back you earn on your credit card at the end of your first year automatically, dollar for dollar, with no limit on how much you can earn. Extra cash. How amazing is that? In fact, it's even more amazing when you realize all the places where Discover is over 95% of places in the U.S. that take credit cards. So when it comes to Discover, get used to hearing yes more often. Learn more at discover.com/yes. 2019 Nielsen Report. Limitations apply.
Well, let me have the position.
Yeah, that's, reality has to accommodate.
But yeah, her background is perfect. She'd be awesome.
But she still wants to do it. She came back all jazzed up.
Because she hasn't worked with me yet. I haven't cracked the whip.
You're actually past faster.
I know.
Just don't go together. With time, American
There are no graduations.
Only cookies. Chocolate chip ones, not the virtual ones.
How much I ask them and appreciate their input on stuff. I'm not a, this is the way it needs to be done kind of person. And I think part of that is that it's got to be clean. It's got to be value the interaction of getting other people's opinions, because I had that opportunity to down with it. So it was really interesting to talk to her and what she did. And then that trip that you guys took on the boat stuff. Yeah, we talked about that because my connection to languages, I was a Spanish teacher, and I spent most of my time in the Basque region of Spain. So that's how we. So anyway, yeah, I go back there quite often. I was outside of Bilbao, so I don't know a lot of Euskera. I know a few words. My kids, they're bilingual. And, right. So anyway, some years ago, I had my midlife crisis and I moved us all to Spain and put my kids in school there. So my youngest was second to third grade, and she was a sponge, so she got more Euskera than any of us, simply because they offered it in school and she took it, and she was at the right age to be a sponge.
That's a really smart way to do midlife crisis.
Yeah. Some people wonder why I took my entire family with me if I was having a crisis, but it was good. Share the wealth of crises.
I'm sure she told you to spend a little time, along the coast and from your festival. But I also went there as well.
Well, I was planning to retire 6 months in that area and 6 months somewhere in the States.
We will get started in a while.
Okay, I'm sorry, I will focus.
Sharing it as recording.
Okay, extra cookies. Do I get extra cookies for this?
You get as many as one person's desire. Plus coffee.
I'm sorry, I'm just in the back and you really bad and unprofessional. I'm sorry. It was called in at the last minute as a ringer.
As a ringer. Yes, so welcome to today's active teaching lab on practical applications for rubrics and not practical applications of rubrics, slight difference. I believe we have one new active teaching lab member, Minako. Is this your first lab? Yeah. Awesome, welcome. And welcome back to everyone that is here. So just to give you an idea of how I hope to organize the next hour. First start off with some introductions. Who are you? What brings you to the lab? And specifically, what about the practical applications of rubrics are you interested in learning about? And also, what do you want to achieve? I also want to start a little bit as well with what is a rubric, sort of based on your own experiences and your own perspectives. What are the rubrics that you're using them? Who is using them? Is it your own students? And when are they being used? And then just to kind of continue the conversation with some examples of different types of rubrics. And the reason why I want to do that is to create a collaborative design for a discussion forum rubric in Canvas using Google Sheets as a way to make that process a little bit less nightmarish. And then talking about how you can share rubrics once you're inside of a course with different faculty members, and even within the Active Teaching Lab Canvas website. And then at the end, I think sort of a challenge activity is sort of creating or crafting a rubric for the Wisconsin experience. And on your desk in front of you, I have a small leaflet that's sort of being distributed kind of broadly across campus now. Just sort of the important pillars of the Wisconsin experience, defining the undergraduate experience here on campus. And so it's 4 of the core values or pillars that we on campus hope that each undergraduate achieves, and then sort of ending with some lingering questions and conclusions. So in front of you, sort of most people already know this, we have the activity sheet. On the activity sheet, I added something at the very bottom. If you have the digital copy of the activity sheet, it would be great if you could log into that. The reason why is because I've created an additional spreadsheet for some of the collaborative work that we're going to be doing with Google Sheets to import those rubrics into Canvas. So if you scroll down all the way at the bottom of the activity sheet, you should see the spreadsheet for, in theory you should see it, right? You should see the spreadsheet for group work. It's a Google Sheet that you can log into just to have some additional practice space. And that URL is at the top of your activity sheet. So if we can go ahead and go around the room and start maybe with Jessica. What brings you to today's lab? What can we help you achieve?
Yeah, so I'm Jessica. I teach in biological systems engineering, and basically just kind of hoping for some inspiration. I use a lot of rubrics.
Inspiration in what way?
I always have a hard time finding like that line between too general and too specific in rubrics. I think it's hard to find that balance, I think.
Okay. Great. Dan, what about you?
I'm Dan Powell. I'm a colleague of JT's, and JT brought me here today.
You're also
so I will be
taking
taking notes in relation to this, but I always have the same questions about rubrics, which is what are other people doing?
Okay. Awesome. Sid.
I'm Sid Brightday. I'm a colleague of JT's and Dan's, and I'm interested in the rubric design process.
In what sense? The actual physical construction of a rubric, or sort of more conceptual orientation?
Conceptual. How do you go from no rubric to a rubric?
Nice. Okay. Hopefully we can do that. Mirako.
Hello. I'm a visiting professor from Japan.
Welcome.
So because of my English listening ability, so I'm afraid of I could understand whole of the meeting, but
Sure.
I'm very interested in rubric.
Okay.
I'm not familiar with rubric, and I have not used rubric of my lecture.
Okay.
So today I'd like to know what is rubric
Great.
designing. So please help me to understand.
Great. Iman.
Hi, I'm Iman. I'm a TA in English. And so a few questions. I want to echo some of the comments, so it balance between individualized and general comments, as well as, so in the summer I TA'd with a course. We started with a rubric, and then finally we just went straight to SpeedGrader and used individualized comments.
Okay.
For 2 reasons. One, scale that we used wasn't really aligned with the other scales that we had in the course. So you would give from 0 to 5, and then at 3 on that scale wouldn't really be an E or an AB on that particular assignment.
Yeah.
And the other reason was that I realized that a lot of students would prefer individualized comments, even if you just include their name in the feedback. So I think that kind of naming or individualized comments might be preferred from the student's perspective than general comments.
Great. That brings up an interesting point that I hope we get to towards the end with designing rubrics and whether or not students themselves can design their own rubric for their project, for example. Awesome. Corey?
My name is Corey Schmidbauer. I'm an instructional designer with Do Academic Technology, so kind of a colleague of Sid and Dan and JT's as well. And I'm just here to learn more about how everybody else uses rubrics. I like the idea from the balance between the specific to general or vice versa, but also trying to learn more how rubrics can fit within Canvas specifically. So still learning the Canvas LMS.
Right. Okay. Awesome. Lauren?
I'm Lauren. I do language things, and I've been using rubrics for a long time, but I am in particular curious about this importing a rubric into Canvas, how that works, and updating, because rubrics seem to be more of an iterative process for me. So once they're in there, what's the best way to, if you need to alter something, do you do that within Canvas? Do you do it in your original one and re-upload it? What's the best
Awesome.
way to go?
Okay. So I hope we get to a lot of these. I'm sure we will. Sort of the way I hope a lot of these questions of individual rubrics and into Campus and the design process will occur over the course of your own work today in the lab. But I do want to start, I think, with Minako's question, what is a rubric? So I'm going to give you a few minutes to answer sort of and think about some of these few questions. How do you define a rubric? What's the purpose? When is it used, etc.? And what are your own experiences with rubrics, either as a student, either as an instructor or instructional designer, if that experience is necessarily different. And then we're going to use this to look at some examples of different types of rubrics, categories of rubrics, if you will, that may or may not be useful for the discussion forum activity that we're going to do afterwards. So I'll give you a few minutes to think about these, and then we will keep going. And Sid, if you would like to work with Nut, or whomever. Up here at Canvas, you'll have access. You already
For an assessment tool.
And not assess.
It didn't more
Something.
specific.
It could be anything from a student work to a conference proposal.
So it was a writing class, and so words, sentences were graded to complete. Where's the grammar and syntax there?
So different,
Different
layers.
levels. Yes, layers is good.
Yeah, it could be used for
And then
all
would that
kinds of
be
stuff, but it's a
so
series
across
of
different
criteria.
assignments? Like
that
if
clearly
so if
defined
they were to
theory.
write a first draft versus a paragraph.
Upon which to assess, you know, how well has something met whatever
That's a good
the
question.
goal or
I only
purposes of that
for
thing.
the final draft,
As soon
but
as
I
you
did
do
give
the Office card,
feedback.
you will be able to log in.
Oh, I guess I also went
drafts.
into when it is
And I
used.
also said, here's the rubric to look at.
Okay.
It
can be used for anything.
Okay. Tim, can I ask you to
I'm a firm believer in
today?
sharing it with students ahead
Okay.
of time, so that way
Just,
when they're
because she doesn't have
doing
an
whatever it is they're
Sure.
doing,
Log
they know
into
what they're in
the
for.
So would you mind working with her to sort of share screens and things like that?
It's-
Awesome. Great.
Yeah.
I don't know how we're gonna share it. So if you were able to log in, this would be like the homepage of the course. And then they have this one, so that's exactly what we have. But Dan is adding notes.
As a student, you didn't.
So I can share.
When I
this
was a
with
student,
you
they
after we're done.
didn't really.
And then there's also slides that are out there. Those are all shared with us.
People weren't really using rubrics for grading.
This year, so when we get to this, I will share it with you. But I think right now what we're doing is, you know, working with this stuff.
Yeah, sorry about that.
So we were talking about rubric and our experiences with rubric.
Yeah, what are yours?
When were they
So
successful and when
mine
did
is
they go
different from
awry?
yours.
So
in
that's
the
where I
sense
get to
that
for
when I
me.
was
It
teaching
seems to
a
be this
writing course,
iterative process.
it was
Like,
always
I
the
think I
first
can
draft
find
that I
things
would
pretty
read.
clearly, and then I
For
get
the
somebody's
final
work
draft,
back,
it
and I'm
would
like,
be
oh, I
the
guess I
holistic
wasn't
comment.
specific enough.
But then for the presentation, I would
Oh, I
use
was
it
too
over
specific.
but I
I
wouldn't
said
share
a
it
minimum
with
of 3, and
So I
they
would
gave me
make,
exactly
so I would
3,
summarize all
or
of
something
those
like
points
that.
that I would make on the rubric sheet, and then I would
Or
kind of personalize
I'll look at
it
something
and
and be like,
post
no,
it.
I really should be
That's
thinking
interesting
about
because
this as a
from a
criteria, and that
instructional
wasn't
designer
one of the
perspective,
criteria I
the
had.
rough draft, part one is, you know, what we call formative learning, like, giving people
What happened with the
still
rubric?
learning
When you, it was a
about
failure
the
story?
process and
Yeah,
how
so
writing
it's like, I always think like a rubric
and then the
degree
final draft,
is, you know,
it's
Yeah.
interesting that you say you write more comments on it because with final projects, it's to prove, it's called, we call summative assessment or summative.
just
And the learning
To
curve
readjust the
expectation
rubric.
because there is no
So your rubrics sort of add up points versus subtract points.
I see.
unless you offer a revision. Otherwise, I mean, it's really great, but it's
Okay.
like you're wasting your time because then
Yeah.
why do they even care?
Yeah, because I'm
If
thinking
they
for me,
don't
like a rubric is always like
finish
subtractive.
that final.
So,
You know, like you, I guess it's a
Everybody
two
got
side.
an
what I
A
mean
until
by
they
final
turned in.
draft,
Sure.
Right,
they had
yeah.
many chances of writing the final draft.
Until you started reading it,
those
right? Yeah.
And then on the
And that, you know, I've wondered
like, say,
that,
writing
and I've
the
asked my
introduction.
daughter, who's a high school
But when we got to the
student,
whole
is, do you feel like when you're starting a new
draft,
semester with a new class,
like it's
do you have 100%? Or do you have?
Oh, yeah,
But
it's
on the
zero.
very
Yeah.
final one,
Which-
yeah.
it would be
Yeah.
Which way do you
Right,
go?
it's like, this is your grade,
Yeah.
here's the, and like, that's what I've done too, is just
Right.
sort of like,
Guilty until
here's the
proven
grade,
innocent.
based on
Right,
your grade,
exactly.
comments, because I already wrote my comments.
Because on the one hand, it's like, well, the only place you have to go is down,
Yeah.
or the only place you have to go is up.
What do you teach?
All right, so let's go ahead and get started with in some of your conversations.
Okay.
An example, and Jessica brought up an interesting definition of a rubric where you start from 0 and you work your way hopefully to an A or 100. And I've always had a rubric as 100, and you just start losing points as soon as you submit the assignment. But for your own definitions, how would you define a rubric, Sid?
And my definition is a structure to describe the characteristics of something that you expect.
Okay. So could we say structured expectations? Lauren, what about you?
A series of categories upon which to assess something, and it could be anything from student work to a conference proposal.
Okay. So then to add on to that, maybe structured expectations for categorical assessment
Yeah.
or evaluation, maybe? Can we play the telephone game and continue over here?
Yeah, I think we talked a lot about formative learning, so I think it could be like a set of guidelines for formative learning.
Okay. So maybe, but is it always formative?
Not always. It can be some of, so I guess instructional designers but I guess it depends on how you want to use the rubric and what
Sure.
your project
Okay.
entails. So it can be used both formatively or summatively. Formative first parts of the project when you're assessing, like if students are writing a rough draft, you do a formative, say, hey, this is where you are. Or you don't have to use it at that point and just use it for the summative.
Okay.
And end final draft. I know
Okay.
it can be complex. I don't want to take up too much time. But
And there's, I love the concision that this board requires. Lauren.
Can I pick up on that
Yes.
and ask a question?
Sure.
So as you were talking, what ran into my head is, sometimes it's hard to determine, okay, which criteria or which categories
Right.
are most important to assess in a summative thing, because there's more than what you really can focus on.
Right.
So if you were using it in a formative way and there were rough drafts along the way, would you maybe in the first rough draft consider assessing these two categories, in the second rough draft these two categories, and by the end you have all 4 or 5 or whatever,
Absolutely.
and do it sort of broken down but then together?
So I'm just speaking from a writing instructor perspective with language, but if you have a project and you want to scaffold, really it's all about what are your objectives for the project or for that particular activities, and what purpose does that serve in the entire course. So I do like that. Absolutely, you have your mini rubrics, okay, we're supposed to learn this in this section, and here's the rubric for that. In this next section, we're going to build upon that, and then these skills, and then here's the rubric for these next level skills and abilities.
Because even in a paper, I could think, well, first and foremost, is there a structure there? Did they
Sure.
actually structure their paper well? And then
Sure.
by the time you get to the end, then maybe you're looking more at transitions and grammatical things, or, you know what I mean,
Yeah.
or something like that. I don't know.
No, you make a
I'm
great point.
pulling this stuff out of my
Yeah,
head.
and not if I was teaching again, I'd totally restructure my course to have more rough drafts with those elements, with the mini rubrics. Yeah, that's great. Absolutely.
Dan, your hand is.
I agree with everything I'm hearing, and it's a lot of what we're saying is focusing on what the rubric's value is for the instructor, how we're
Yes.
using it, what it does
Right.
for us, it's our map. But I also want to say it's a form of communication to the student.
Right.
It is a message that they read, it's justifying, it's explaining, but it's also, I mean, it's trying to elaborate beyond a letter or a number, say, and this is what the letter and number to an extent means. So it's a form of communication.
So to that end, we could say the users of a rubric obviously are instructors, instructional designers. What's the possibility for a student to use a rubric? Assuming that communication is not a one-way street.
There's a lot of possibilities. They can, I mean, the basic one is they see their grade and they read the rubric and they know what the grade means a bit more than they did. But they also can self-grade, they can self-assess and peer evaluate, they can use it in planning, they can use it to, as a checklist, they can use it as a goal.
Sure.
And I think it goes back to the question of how specific or general do rubrics need to be, because you can have your very basic
It's the $1 million
numerical
question, right?
rubric, but then, okay, you got a 5, which means an advanced level or good level, but what does that actually mean? So if you have specific categories with specific explanations of each range of category, then it's a little bit better. I mean, always with my rubrics, I add additional comments, but that takes up more time as well. So,
Which maybe defeats
the purpose of a
So
rubric.
could we say that rubric, maybe the purpose of a rubric is for efficiency, or is it for instructor efficiency, or is it for student understanding? Because your comment saying you sort of lamented the fact that you add comments to something that is already structured enough to give comments.
Right.
But
Yeah.
so the question of
fairness as well, right? I guess like that's why I tried.
what was the first part? I'm sorry.
Fairness.
Yeah.
So
To
that
yourself or
everybody's
to
being
students?
graded equally?
Yeah. I guess like that's why.
Sure. But your rubric can fail, right? Because you yourself admitted that.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
But once you
They
graded the
all
exam
time.
and you realize everyone's failed, then you
Well,
adjusted
sometimes
the
you gotta like take a little preview and readjust your expectations after your preview.
So this question of specific and general, I think, is really interesting, and I found these just sort of very silly examples of rubrics, but I think they're solid in terms of their definitional perspective. So an example of a holistic rubric sort of treating the entire experience or the entire task, for example, of breakfast in bed, right? So in terms of specific and general, you have all food is perfectly cooked, presentation surpasses expectations, and recipient is kept exceptionally comfortable throughout the meal. That sounds great, but what does that even mean, right? What perfectly cooked, I mean,
According to you?
according to the evaluator's standard
Right,
or to the...
Right, exactly. According to whom?
The presentation surpasses the expectations. If the person who's preparing your breakfast in bed, they just botched it the last time. Exceptionally comfortable, is that variable between individuals? Could you use this rubric for your partner versus your child that's preparing your food, for example? An analytic rubric looks a little bit more like the Jeopardy board. Here you have your evaluative criteria. So what are the pieces, the expectation or the categorical assessments of food, presentation, and comfort. With beginning, developing, and Corey, you just mentioned this, we're getting to that superior status. One thing that I really like with this, and sort of at least in the 2 examples that we've seen so far, is that perfection almost seems unobtainable because it's predicated on surpassing an expectation that wasn't communicated by the rubric or wasn't communicated by anything else, just sort of you've been surprised by the work product. It could be horrible and you could be surprised by that, right? So you should give that student an A again.
No, I'm looking at that, and I agree that that's a very typical problem of a rubric, but it's one that you can think about in calibrating it. That if you think about what your final grade should be, if they meet expectation, whether that be an A or an AB or whatever, and then you have a surpassing category that gives beyond that score, then it's possible to have, I mean, you know, you don't expect everyone who does an assignment to get 100%, that's normal. But your grade score can give above what you expect. And that way, if you have your top category be beyond expectations, and they actually are giving beyond expectations, and the score is also beyond expectations, as long as it's calibrated right. But the mistake people typically make, and it goes back to what Ethan was saying, was that the grade scale doesn't correspond to the categories of a rubric most of the time, unless you actually think that through.
Right. So, which is the thing we'll see because you've generated that yourself, and we'll get that to a second. Lauren, did you say something? Nope. So just another example, and I think maybe this is for me, in my own experience in teaching French, this is more the type of rubric that I always use because it was very easy to click through. Sort of for me, having 25, 26 students, just the efficiency of this just seemed a little bit easier because with sort of language learning, you know, the mechanics of spelling or all the verbs conjugated is, you know, have you used the vocabulary from the chapter that we're studying, things like that can be added into the rubric very easily and very easily assessed. This is one that came up in a lab last semester. It's one that I had never heard of before, actually. It's called a single point rubric, and Lauren, you are nodding your head.
Yeah, because I brought that one up, because I've seen them.
You
I haven't actually used them, but I thought what I really like about it is the concerns and the advanced part gives you a space to give the commenting that Corey was talking about to really help a student understand why they landed where they landed.
But what I'm not really certain that I understand is this just a baseline?
Like, is it met or not met? Like,
yeah,
right.
like is it like this
Is
is?
that really what
and I guess
is?
in my frame of mind, is this a C?
So this could be.
And then that's
that
an
this,
AB or this is an F?
I would use this for something more formative.
Okay.
Whereas,
so like a draft, for example. That you
yeah. So whereas the Jeopardy board one would be my summative. I think. I think that's how I would do it. So
by this level, by level 2, you're supposed to meet these criteria, and you think it.
And it shows to the extent, you know, so it gives them the feedback that they would know for their next iteration, their next draft, to improve it before they get they would see I think what I would do is I would give them the Jeopardy rubric from the beginning so they know where we're headed.
Yeah.
Sure.
This is your ultimate thing that you're going for. And then along the way with the drafts, I'd have them know, you know, this is where you could use improvement so that when you get to the Jeopardy rubric, you can be at a 3 or a 4.
Yeah. And for the student that like really wants that A, either a 93 or 100, regardless, how do you, I guess in your own instructional experiences, do you ever address what exceeding expectations means? Like, what does it look like? An example of when your expectations have been exceeded by a course, so they have no idea what to shoot for, or is it really just a shot in the dark of overwhelming success in the project? Because to me, that just seems to suggest that an A is unattainable.
Right.
And so don't hope for it. Hope for the AB, and maybe you'll get an A. It just seems sort of a deflating. Yeah.
But if accomplished is an A, then what you said is not. Then it's not unattainable. If you set your numbers right and accomplished actually corresponds to 96%, for example, then an A is very obtainable by that second row, and then someone could exceed in one area, be below in another area, and the two cancel each other out.
Yeah, like super uncomfortable, but the food tastes great. Or something.
That's where you exemplary can be used, but not on a scale where you lose 25% of your grade just by losing one.
Right.
It's the numbering across the top that makes that one particularly.
It makes it devastating for a lot of students. And this is exactly the sort of point scale that Dan was talking about. Dan, would you mind while you...
I can remember how that works.
So on a 5-point scale, obviously a 100 would be
Yeah.
5.
This was something I put together for an assignment that had 4 or 5, a number of different criteria that had different weight. Some of them were weighted 25 points, some 10, 20, some 10, and some 5. And in order to come out with eventually giving the student a grade that actually corresponded to the real grade scale, this allows you to say what is the upper limit of the points out of 5 if you want to give them an A, and what's the midpoint of that, what's the lower. So for example, the 5, if your grade scale's on the very far left is at 93 and above is an A, then 4.65 out of 5 is an A. And if you take the default Canvas rubric, which automatically goes 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, then what you're actually giving is either 100%, or if they lose 1 point, they're getting a C or a high BC, 70, like 80%.
It'd be 80, so it would be
Yeah, it would be, and so that's what a 4 is, and I used this to try to explain to instructors why their grade scale became, what I always found, we had these very elaborate grade scales for writing assignments, where you would tick off 1 point, 1 point, 1 point, and by the end of it, instructors were always saying, oh, but I gave them an extra 5 because that was way too low. You know, they were always wrestling with the final grade, but they were doing that because if you have a bunch of criteria out of 10, and you start knocking off 1 or 2 points, you're actually knocking them down 10% every time. And cumulatively, that's the same, that is a big dig on their grade. So this was trying to say, well, if you really want it to get you to the grade you want without having to do that adjustment at the end, then you need to think about setting these fractional values of 5, 4.65, 4.4, 4.15, and down, so that those numbers actually correspond to the grade scale for the course. And then when you're done and you have actually graded with it, you get a grade that makes sense. And it's the one you kind of were aiming for all along, you know, in your selections. Does that make sense or not?
Yes.
It's more complicated than it needs to be in the screenshot. The actual the spreadsheet is a little bit easier to use than that. I threw a link into the handout for it.
I got the part for the upper section of this table, but what's the mid and lower?
Oh, in this course, this one came from a course which had a funky grade scale. And so the A, well, no, actually, it's the mid-range. A is 93 to 100 in this one. So 95 is the middle point of that.
So that would be a 4.75 out of 5 would be a 95.
Would be yeah. So actually, I think that what I eventually used to set was that blue set in the middle, where it's like, out of 5, A was set to 4.75. Out of 10, A is set to 9.5. Out of 20, A is set to 19. Yeah? And that works very well. The only thing is that Canvas does not allow you to have a grade scale at the 20 where the top range is not 20. You have to give, the top value has to be 100% in Canvas. And then you can do this below that, but that means you really do need the exemplary category, which is, you so nailed this that I'm giving you 100% on this category. And beyond it, I'm giving you an A+, essentially. So you can do that. Or you could just say, anybody who gets an A gets 100% in that course. You know, and that's a little bit, that's not fighting against Canvas then. But the grade scale, the blue section in the middle, are the numbers that you would actually need to set your criteria to equal if you want to come out with giving a C on the rubric actually gets a C in their grade. Does that make sense now?
So this is going to be useful for now because I would like to move towards creating a rubric for a discussion post in Canvas, and we're going to use Google Sheets to draft it and then import it. However, in this, the link to this spreadsheet is at the bottom of your activity sheet. I hope everyone can get into it, right above the green cartoon. Is there anyone that's not able to get into this? Corey, Lauren?
Where is it? It's on the
It's at the bottom of the activity sheet.
Bottom of the spreadsheet right
Yep.
there. Okay. Yep.
And I also have paper copies. Not paper copies, but if you would rather just use sheet of paper, tried and true is always fine. There you go. So the way that this has to work in Canvas is you have to follow this this format, if you will. So, just to give an example with the Wisconsin experience, one of the pillars of the Wisconsin experience is empathy. So that is an evaluative criteria. The quality of empathy could be distinguished. For example, you have distinguished empathy, you have superior, advanced, all the way down to insufficient, whatever. The column that needs to be, the third column needs to be the point value. So here, for example, you would have empathy, distinguished, and if you have a 5-point rubric, it would be 5 points. And then for 3, however, or everything here is 5, everything here would be 4, everything here would be 3. Does that make sense so far? Have I lost anyone? All good? Jessica? In terms of the formatting of the spreadsheet.
I'm like thinking a few steps ahead. I'm good.
Okay. So what I would like for you to do in this spreadsheet is think of a rubric and the qualities of a good discussion forum post in terms of length or images or whatever sort of evaluative criteria that you have. 2 examples of the qualitative criteria that, distinguished and then superior, and assigning 2 points, either 5 points, 10 points, 100 points, whatever the case may be. The reason why I'm asking you to do it this way is because we'll have to copy and paste this to put it into Canvas, but it has to be in this way. I realize this doesn't look visually, this doesn't correspond to a rubric, but this is how it will work. So I'll give you a few minutes, maybe 5, to think about what are the actual criteria of a good discussion post, and then to think of what are some of the qualifying criteria as superior, et cetera, and then to assign some point values. If you could do that within this spreadsheet, that would be helpful. At the bottom, I've created some new pages if you would like additional practice space. This is sort of my just staging ground. But I will leave this up here for you as sort of a guidepost to help you with that design process. All good? Lauren, you okay?
I think so. So the left side is going to be a criteria like creativity or something like that.
So yeah, so for example, to give you the example here with the Wisconsin experience.
Okay, got it.
The pillars of the Wisconsin experience that we are evaluating
And
are
then
empathy.
where you have distinguished, is that where you would put like a paragraph descriptor?
Yep, distinguished is,
Okay.
distinguished empathy means this.
Okay.
Superior empathy means that.
Okay.
The third column is the point value that you assign to
Right,
distinguished.
To distinguished, and then, I got it.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay, so I'll give you a few minutes to work through that. And if you want to work with someone, it doesn't necessarily have to be a silent activity. Corey, how you doing?
No.
Okay, so in a discussion post, let's just say the grammar, and then
Okay.
maybe just say you have distinguished grammar.
Oh, just distinguished, not even comments?
Right, because that's the quality of the grammar is distinguished.
Okay.
And then you can have your text and explain what distinguished means,
Okay.
but the qualitative category is distinguished.
Okay,
Does that make
so
sense?
yes.
Okay, so then do you want to give them 5 points? Sure.
Mm-hmm.
And then another category, one step below distinguished could be
Okay.
sufficient
Okay.
or
got it.
readable, and then you give that a point value. Okay, and then we can go over here and maybe create one more evaluative criteria. Let's say length, just for the sake of the thought. Has to be distinguished as well,
Okay.
and same number of points. Sounds good?
Sounds good. Okay, thanks.
You all right?
I think so. Are we doing this in a group or?
You can do it individually, or we're going to copy and paste just to give an example of what that looks like into Canvas.
So where would you put like the descriptions?
You could very easily just go like this. Distinguished is,
Okay, it's fine. Like Canvas won't get angry like you did.
we will see. It should not, in the practices that I did, it did not.
And this is assuming if you want to upload this into Canvas. Otherwise, you can
Exactly.
create your own rubrics externally.
Correct.
Right. Okay. Canvas doesn't have, like, it doesn't have an option where you can add rubric and then manually.
It does.
Oh, it does.
So we're going to get
It's
to that
terrible.
just to show you.
Okay.
And the reason why I wanted to do it this way is to show you that it is terrible.
Sure.
And this might facilitate the process, and it sort of relates to Sid's question of, I believe, sort of editing, design, where do you house it, how are you editing it,
Great.
versus editing on Canvas rubric. You might as well
Sure.
just stop.
Okay.
Like it.
Thanks. I'm still learning Canvas.
That's what we're here for. Who is this one in row 9?
That would be me.
That's you, Lauren.
Yeah. And with it, there only being 2 or 3 levels, do we have 5 points or do we have 3 points?
Oh yeah, should it be 3, 3, 2, 1?
You could do it that way. It'll work.
Or
Sure.
is this where you get into the weighted rubric where certain criteria are
No.
less important
I have
than
not weighted it.
other criteria? Okay. Can you, if you do weight something, can you, in Canvas, import that weightedness, or do you do it after it's in
I think you have to do
Canvas?
it afterwards, once you import it from Google Sheets. So far, so good? Is everyone ready to see if this experiment totally fails?
Sure.
All right. So you have your rubric designed here in Google Sheets or Excel. I think it works in that way. So if you go into the Canvas page, currently for the course, I have a discussion set up already. So I'm just going to sort of walk you through it. Please, if I'm taking a step wrong, please let me know immediately. So this is for today's discussion with a rubric. So because I'm on the instructor side, you're obviously not going to see all of these. So if I'm losing you in any steps, please just let me know. So I created the discussion, discuss and then be evaluated on your discussion. Those are the best instructions. Going to the edit portion, it is graded. Oh, who submitted? So you see on the discussion portion on the kebab or the shish kebab, whatever it's called, and the top right, adding a rubric. The problem is, this is what happens in Canvas immediately. Either you can create a rubric yourself and click through, click a bunch of options here down at the bottom. And then if we have time today, I do want to show you adding criterion from the Canvas outcomes, which could be linked with APHIS to make sort of that rubric aligned. Going to find a rubric, and then you have every rubric that you've ever had access to in Canvas, which that could be an overwhelming list. Unfortunately, this is a complicated process, I apologize. Then manage rubrics, and finally, import. And this is where you would copy and paste your first, everything you have. I'm just going to do that small little section. So I've taken the evaluative criteria with the qualitative criteria and just the first little piece. Oh. Please let this work. All right. Should come up like that.
I hope this works, Rubric.
So the title does appear.
So you clicked add rubric to get there?
Yeah, so clicking add rubric and then to import rubric.
Right. Okay.
And then your rubric has appeared. So that's just getting it into Canvas. It's sort of a complicated process, I understand that. Going back to the discussion, opening the discussion, going back to that, adding a rubric, find your rubric, and that's called the,
Hope this works.
yeah. And now your rubric has been assigned to the discussion. Dan.
What were the delimiters between the data points and the when you import?
They were just little dashes that I added,
You added
just for
them.
visual distinction.
And does it need those, or does it automatically create a rubric?
You could not insert a table, sort of like a format condition table, if I understand correctly. You have to have just a sort of a naked column in Excel, if you will, which I can show you.
Can you go back to what the thing was that you started from?
So this is not a table.
No.
So in the sense that you could not sort these data sets sort of alphabetically if you wanted to. Have I lost you?
It's just a spreadsheet.
Yeah, these are just unconnected cells that I've populated with text.
Okay, and
There's-
that's what it takes to make the rubric?
Uh-huh.
It just automatically grabs whatever.
So long as it is in this specific order.
Which is
It has to be in the evaluative criteria on the far left,
criteria,
the
descriptor value.
then the point
descriptor
value.
value,
Uh-huh.
descriptor value.
So
With no
visually it's not
no
the-
commas or anything. It's not a CSV or anything.
Exactly. No comments.
And the dash is something you put in, but it doesn't need that. Is that
Right.
correct?
The reason why I put the dash is because if you just wanted to say, distinguished empathy means you're awesome.
And it's not the space that, it actually is figuring out that there's a column there. So if you have
Correct.
a long description, it's not gonna like make that into a 40.
So long as you wrap the text and keep that in a column. Mm-hmm.
Interesting. And
So-
you cut it and pasted it in.
Hmm?
You just cut and pasted it.
You just cut and paste. It does require a lot of different clicking. However, clicking in Canvas versus clicking between two tabs and then copy and paste, just because it looks like you're having a sigh of relief, like, you know, it is a lot easier than that. AJ.
I think I read when you imported it that it was tab delimited,
Mm-hmm.
so that might be the thing.
Oh.
Tabs. But I think you'd have to do it that way because I'm pretty sure if you hit tab, it would jump you out of the window that you're working in. So I don't think you can just like type it in. If anyone is following what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Like if you go back to where you imported it, you could just type it directly in.
So just following through again, going back to adding. Oh.
Part of this is my trick to see you do that again because it was so many steps.
I'm just going to go to a discussion rubric or discussion that we don't already have a rubric on. So you go into the original discussion itself, going to, oh, there's already a rubric, I'm sorry. Let's see. Clicking on the, oh, there's a rubric there too.
I just created a new discussion and I'm not getting that pop-up for rubric.
Did you click the three dots?
Yeah.
You have to, so you have to save the discussion and then go back into it.
Whatever has to be a perfect discussion.
Oh,
So
yeah,
I'll just start a
exactly.
new one and then give you the walkthrough. So task 2. And then AG, would you mind explaining again the... So creating the discussion, clicking that it's graded, right? Points possible, well, let's just say 10 points possible. Should be sufficient. Save. And then back onto the 3 dots. Lauren, do you see that?
Yep. So I think I didn't have it as a graded discussion.
Ah.
That's why.
Mm-hmm.
That's the part where I failed.
And Corey, to get to the question that you had and Sid as well, just sort of looking at this within Canvas, all of these pop-ups occur. You have to edit each individual cell, which isn't necessarily distinct from doing it in Google Sheets or within Excel. Just the visual component seems a little more unwelcoming.
The windows are really buggy, like especially on a Mac. Like it's just.
And the difference between Chrome and Firefox, too, I've noticed on my end, it does sort of result in page orientation differences. Dan, yeah.
Just to answer a question that I had, can you do this not in discussions, but just through rubrics? And yeah, you can. I went to outcomes and manage rubrics and add rubric and import rubric.
Yeah.
It got to the same place CUR. So presumably also with assignments, you can do it there.
So this is an example of doing it within a discussion. Lost anyone so far? Obviously, this is deep in the weeds of Canvas, but Iman, you okay?
I'm good, yeah. Okay, thanks.
One of the, I guess in the few minutes that we have left, one of the last things that I wanted to talk about was the use of a rubric in outcomes, which, Sid, would you mind describing a little bit APHIS and how that links to outcomes?
My understanding, which is incomplete, so every course needs to have outcomes. That as a result of taking this course, you'll be able to love 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5 things. And that these are set for the course. So that if you're taking English 101, you'll learn these 5 things regardless of which section you're in. APHIS is a tool, and so this data can go into a campus database, and APHIS can get that data out of the database. And then in Canvas, it can say, oh, you're teaching English 101, here are the outcomes, the course outcomes for 101. So it's a system that has this information, if it's been entered, and then can pull it back. So it helps get you consistency among all the sections of English 101, and also that campus administrators can look across and says, what are we teaching here anyway? Things like that.
Okay. So,
but they're not necessarily connected to Canvas outcomes. That's a different tool.
Okay.
So outcomes, the word outcomes means slightly different but similar things depending on where you're using the word.
Okay.
So what did you just say? So this tool is not connected to APHIS?
Outcomes, Canvas outcomes, I do not understand it to be connected to APHIS outcomes.
Okay.
Okay.
There's if you teach a timetable course, you'll have a link in the left called
Course syllabus APHIS.
Okay, thank you. And that tool does draw from the APHIS outcomes.
Okay. Because this is not a timetable course, it's just other
Right, so you don't have it.
Right.
But
Okay.
but Canvas that outcomes link in Canvas is something conceptually similar but technically different.
Gotcha. Thank you.
So say, for example, one of the outcomes of your course is related to the Wisconsin experience. Okay, so that's why I wanted to drop those on there. In the outcomes tool, you can obviously create this outcome called empathy and humility. So you can create an outcome of the course that is necessarily this, maybe something that applies to lots of different rubrics or different portions of your course. And so now it's automatically been created. So far, so good? Let's say you wanted to add that to the discussion. So you already have a set number of outcomes in the course or at the departmental level that you've imported from a Canvas course that is being housed or has already been created in your own department. Add this back to the help box. And going back into the edit settings of your rubric, you can find this outcome that you've already determined for sort of the broader, maybe summative assessments of your course or the summative evaluation of your course, and already have that plugged into Canvas, so that way each time you're not going back in and perhaps even altering the outcome of the course. That way you sort of have that standard set feature already in Canvas, easy for you to use, and to just sort of plug and play into your rubric, and it automatically imports. It does show up differently for students, and this could be an interesting way for you to distinguish sort of larger values and outcomes of the course itself, distinct from whether or not their discussion post is 500 words, and it had a video or something like that as a component of the course. Sort of higher level evaluations and or higher level objectives of the course that you can include into the rubric that are visually distinct for students. So far, so good.
You clicked on find outcome and that's how you added it?
Yep.
Okay.
And even though we've imported this rubric from Google Sheets, you can still add a new criterion and add to that if you want to go through that unfortunate process of trying to edit the rubric inside of Canvas. I wouldn't recommend that just because it is far more complicated than I think that it necessarily needs to be.
What if I wanted to change this rubric a little bit, like select makes changes? So would I need to copy and paste and import the rubric again?
You can just click on edit here,
Okay.
and then you have the little pencils that show up, and you can change it there a little bit.
Sure.
But if you have like these massive substantive changes that you're making to a rubric, I would just import them one.
Okay, delete.
Versus going through each one of these little pencil
Sure.
windows and
Okay.
like that.
If you wanted to update an outcome and you went in and you updated it in outcomes, would it automatically update on the rubric, or do you have to re-add that outcome to the rubric?
Well, let's test that.
It's not in there at all.
I think we're in a different discussion.
Oh, did I put it in a different one?
I think in test 2.
So then, yeah, Lord, it does not automatically update. To answer your question.
Or maybe it wasn't there.
Well, let's see. Hope this works, right? It does not. At least here it doesn't.
Okay.
So then adding outcomes to each individual rubric might actually just be more hassle than it could necessarily be worth, but you'd only have to add outcomes once to the course and then edit them. Yeah.
I'm wondering if anybody here knows if anyone's using Canvas outcomes. I've never heard of anyone using it. I've heard of people using the APHIS outcomes and limited, like School of Pharmacy and a few others, but anybody come across someone using Canvas outcomes?
No, but what I've read when we were transitioning and I knew more about Canvas than I remember now, it seemed like outcomes are really most value in K-12, where like you have a standard that all third graders will be able to do something, and that your school could set up these outcomes and they could be attributed to all the third grade classes. So everybody who's teaching third grade could then access these standard outcomes. But usually when someone asks me, I tell them that they're more an advanced feature and to wait to use them.
Advanced, and one thing I can think of that may be useful is if you are using outcomes through Canvas Commons and you're sort of inheriting a course, you can already see what, at least in past iterations, what some of those outcomes have been. If it's a standardized course, like for the example you mentioned, English 101, if that changes faculty hands from one semester to another, but you sort of have that already designed Canvas shell, you know what at least the course outcomes are, and maybe as a way to avoid the hassle of the APHIS background, perhaps. Dan?
One thing I'd say from a lot of attending a lot of sessions about APHIS outcomes is that APHIS is the tool that campus is using for doing this. And it's not available to use yet to everybody, but it will be coming and it will be shared, and at some point that will be here. So if you are really interested in this, putting your energy into setting up APHIS would probably be better than using the Canvas one that isn't the one that campus is choosing to use for that.
So, does APHIS connect to Rubrics? Like,
Yes, it will.
It will, but it's not yet.
Quite yet. I keep hearing people say that it's going to.
And on the bottom of today's activity sheet, there are 2 links to the current initiative APHIS. You can get more specific updates where they are in that timeline, in addition to DESOL, which is an assessment learning analytics initiative. But I do want to emphasize that on the digital version of the activity sheet, a lot of the step-by-step links or step-by-step processes that we went through for importing a rubric from Google Sheets into Canvas, those links are available. And Jessica, specifically for you and for others as well, at the top where it says tips for rubrics, you have 2 resources that have been developed at the Teach Online at the UW program to kind of work through whether or not too specific versus too general, so you can drill down into more detail into those resources. So it seems like we got through hopefully a lot of your questions. The one that we did not, I think, address is individual rubrics and what student contributions can be made into those, and whether or not the scalability of rubrics are 2 questions that we still have outstanding, but hopefully you think about those over the course of the rest of the day and the weekend. And if you don't mind filling out a few comments on your evaluation sheet. Tomorrow morning at 8:30 we have intra-departmental collaboration on tap with bagels and coffee. And we hope to see you there, and if not, next week. I believe we are starting Thursday with another iteration of Pressbooks and Engage e-texts, and that'll be 1 o'clock on next Thursday. So thank you for coming, and have a good afternoon.
Do I need to do anything over here?
Hit. I'll do it.
Oh, is this the one that's up there? No,
That's mine.
What's this have to do with it?
That's the